Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Judge Iain, and I am the law.
And I'm also Judge Iain, and I'm the law.
And I'm Judge John, and I am the law.
Stop. Look, we can't all be the law.
How about we?
Hey, interrupting the intro is a punishable offense with a sentence of 5 years in the ISO cube. Now listen here. John and Iain are not the law. I am the law.
As you may have guessed, this week we're covering Judge Dredd.
That is to say, the 2012 movie Dredd, not the Sly Stallone version.
Thank God for that.
To accompany it, I got Iain to read Judge Dredd, The Complete Case Files, Volume 3.
And I'm here too.
What did I tell you? That's it, perp. You're coming with me.
It's judgment time.
Welcome back on the show, John.
Thank you for having me, Iain.
You're welcome.
I like the voices you were doing in the intro.
My natural voice, or...?
Well, like, there was your voice, and then there was, like, your judge voice, but then there was also the third voice you were doing.
Yeah.
Where you were pretending to be a different Iain. And you didn't do that last time I guested, and I was wondering why. And now I really think it's good that I get the dual Iain experience.
Yeah. I give one of them quite a heavy stutter just for a laugh.
I'm the stutter.
Hey, John, this is Iain. Iain, this is John. You did not meet last time because Iain
I was
wasn't
not
here.
there.
So,
Hello. Right.
Hi, Iain.
introductions made.
So, I thought before we moved on to Dredd, the main course, I guess, we'd have a little catch-up and a little chin wag, a little conversation with John, or as I would like to call it, a John-versation.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Go ahead. Yeah, we can get to know John again.
But yeah, it's great to actually finally see you and talk to you. And also, thank you for the shout-out that you did on your podcast for us.
That's all right. No, yeah, it's good to meet you too. It's also great to see the facial expressions that Iain has when you do a joke, because I can imagine them in my head when I'm listening. But being able to see it like live is most excellent. But no, yeah. No, I love the podcast. Pleasure to be back on. Slightly different reading material to the last two times I was on. Film different in tone, I'd say.
Well, we've had a variety now because we had Captain America the Winter Soldier, Persepolis, and now Judge Dredd. So variety is the spice of life, as they say, and we certainly have kept it varied for you, John.
Yes.
Sometimes it can be quite spicy,
Yes,
sometimes
indeed.
it can be quite beige. Depends what we're covering. But yeah, also, I thought I'd say well done on your nomination for your podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
I saw that happened.
Yeah, bit weird. But yeah, I don't really know what to say about it, which was awkward on the pod, but it just sort of slightly bemused and very flattered. So it's a good time. But I'm glad people like what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a very good show, actually. I mean, I know next to nothing about the subject matter that you're largely talking about, which is the fandom of sci-fi conventions and things like that. It's not something I've ever been to, but it's still a very entertaining and very knowledgeable presenting team you've got there. I really like that. It's sometimes nice, even if you don't quite understand the subject matter, to just hear people who are passionate about something talk about that thing passionately. So yes, it's very good. And for those who don't know, John's podcast, Octothorpe, was nominated for a Hugo Award, which is a very big deal.
Yeah. It's more of a big deal if you're nominated for like a comic or a movie or a book than it is for a podcast, but it was still very nice. And actually, that's where a lot of my comic reading kind of more recently kind of got kickstarted again by reading stuff that was nominated for the Hugos, because that's how I got into Ms. Marvel, because I was nominated and I kind of started reading. But that was my introduction to the superhero side of Marvel comics, because up to that point, I'd basically just been reading Star Wars.
Yeah.
Iain knows I'm a massive Star Wars fan, and so I'd been reading all the comics, but now I'm reading like Ms. Marvel and Ironheart and a bunch of other stuff, which is really great.
Yeah, we met through our shared love of Star Wars, so yeah, that is how we got to know each other.
Weirdly enough, me and Iain are both wearing Star Wars things today.
Yeah, I am too.
Oh, and you?
Mine's,
I can't see.
Mine's from a Star Wars podcast, so yeah, it's
So indie. John the indie boy.
Something like that. No, there's a podcast called Campaign, which is a actual play of the Star Wars role-playing system with like some improv comedians from Chicago, and it is absolutely hilarious, and I love it with all my heart. So I'm wearing a t-shirt from that today.
Sounds good. You mentioned there Ms. Marvel, though. Now, for our anniversary show, you mentioned that your two most anticipated projects were Ms. Marvel and Moon Knight. Now, we are currently 4 episodes into Moon Knight at time of recording. Are you enjoying it? Did it live up to your expectations?
I like it. No, yeah, I think it's really good. I mean, obviously Oscar Isaac is amazing. Ethan Hawke is good in it as well. And the Egyptian woman whose name I regrettably don't know, but she is also very good.
In fairness, she's not as famous as the others.
No,
so I think that's fair.
That's fair. No, and I think the performances are great. There are bits of it I really like. And I really enjoy that it's not... There was like a period in Marvel where like even the first Thor movie was kind of not going too into how weird some of the Marvel universe is. And then I have friends who are watching this and they're like, but what is going on? And I'm like, well, what it is, you see, is that there's this guy and he is a bit funny and sometimes he's wearing white. And that's all you need to know. Just enjoy it. And they're like, we're less convinced than you, John, that this is a real good thing. But I'm like, I'm enjoying it so much. You don't understand. This is one of my favourite characters. Iain, if you could imagine they'd made a TV series of Iron Fist...
Oh.
It's like that. Imagine how happy that would make you.
I can only imagine.
And then that's how happy I am now.
Wow. Oh, one day.
I know.
We can all dream.
We can only hope.
Yeah, exactly. Can't wait till he fights that dragon.
I'm an episode behind on Moon Knight. I've not seen the latest one. So the last one that I watched was when he woke up in that place. Let's just say that for people who haven't yet seen it.
Yes.
It's more exciting than that makes it sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm liking it so far. I'm a bit worried about how much they're going to have to pack into the final episodes to wrap things up, because there's only 6 episodes and it seemed to spend a lot of time getting somewhere in the first 3 episodes. But I am enjoying it. Like you say, Oscar Isaac, I think, is excellent.
Yeah, you also, earlier on, John, you said about Miss Marvel. Obviously, it's not yet out, but the trailer is. Do you like what you've seen so far?
Yeah.
Intrigued by it?
I mean, firstly, they had The Weeknd like as the track underneath the trailer, and that makes all trailers immediately great. So very difficult to objectively tell what it's going to be like, because presumably the entire show won't have that underneath
I
it.
think not.
You never know.
But no, I'm excited. I think I like how they've portrayed her powers on screen, because I think there is a worry that the way her powers are done in the comic book might look a bit silly on screen. So they've kind of done it in a more like mystical visual, which I kind of like. And I'm looking forward to kind of something that centers maybe a different side of the American experience to the one we've seen previously. And I think having that done in TV gives you more time to explore that potentially. So I'm excited about that. But I'm also excited about her just being awesome and doing superhero-y things. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. And again, some of my friends were like, oh, this seems a bit similar to Hawkeye. And I'm like, does it though? I was just... They said because she was quipping and Hawkeye quips, and I'm like, have you...
I mean, that is all Marvel films.
I was going to say, like...
That's MCU.
Yeah, but I'm very much looking forward to it. It looks very original to me, and I really like the colour palette of the trailer. I don't know whether they'll follow that style through the whole series, but I liked the aesthetic of the trailer a lot, and I'm hoping that does bleed through to the series, because I think... Other than Loki, I'm not sure the MCU TV series have really had like super solid visual identities, and I think that would be something that would be cool to see them play a little bit more with.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think WandaVision did, certainly. I mean, I think it had that. Obviously, each episode was a different style, but it definitely had a distinct tone. It's just a shame that ultimately it came down to 2 CGI people punching each other. But it's always a bit of a shame when they resort to that in the final episode, and when something has been a bit different. But I agree with you about it seems to be Phase 4 of Marvel does seem to be trying to give greater emphasis to telling different stories. I think the first 3 phases, apart from Black Panther, I want to say, it was a largely American-focused story up until that point. So it's nice that this time around there does seem, with the Eternals and Shang-Chi, there seems to be a greater emphasis on telling stories from elsewhere, it opens everything up. I do think that sometimes makes it seem more separate, with the original Marvel, because everything was taking place pretty much in the same place. It was much easier to bring those things together. So I do wonder how they're going to do that. Phase 4's culmination, whatever it's going to be, Avengers 4, whatever they end up calling it, is going to be a trickier task, I think, of bringing all of those plot threads together. But we'll see what happens.
Could be Secret Wars. But I don't know anything about it, so I can't comment. I've heard things.
So Secret Wars would work, actually. That's not a bad shout as a guess, because it's basically someone, whether it's Beyonder or the Doctor Doom version with all the different worlds, has a planet where they just get all of the heroes and gets them together and says, look, you're on this plane now, or this planet. So yeah, that could work. And then they will have to meet each other. So I suppose, yeah, you may have unconsciously stumbled into the answer there, is just have essentially a godlike figure put them on a plane and go, fight.
That's it. That's the film.
Done. So I'd watch it.
That's bad.
I wanted to ask John a question. Well, actually, there's several questions that I will ask John, but throughout the episode. I was listening to the episode of your podcast where you did do a shout out for us. So again, thank you. But you said that you liked the old guard and Ian's opinions were wrong.
I did say that. I was wondering whether that would come up. I thought it was good. But I also like The Losers. So I think me and Ian just categorically disagree on team-up based action comedies. I think I have an enormous amount more time for them than Ian does.
Was The Old Guard a comedy?
No, that's fair. I mean, there were a couple of chuckles, but not many.
I mean, it was laughable, but it was not a comedy.
Oh, shots fired. So, fun fact, I have The Losers on Blu-ray.
Wow.
I know. And I went to see it in the cinema twice.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I really like that movie, a lot.
Have you watched it recently?
No, I think you might be right that it hasn't stood up very well. I think the main thing is that what I like is Chris Evans getting paid money to be Chris Evans. Mm-hmm. And there are many more films now where he is paid to be Chris Evans than there were at the time. And so I do wonder whether I'd watch it and be like, oh, I could just watch Captain America movies instead.
Well, I think nowadays Chris Evans is paid to be different people, whereas in the old days he was paid to be Chris Evans. He was very much doing a Ryan Reynolds at that part in his career.
Yeah, no, you could be right.
Yeah.
But I really like it when he gets given comedic roles. And so one of the things I loved about Avengers Endgame was the bits where he gets to kind of do the sly wink to the camera, spoilers for Endgame for anyone who hasn't seen it, which I suspect is low in your listenership. But when he does the Hail Hydra in Endgame and the whole I really am America's arse and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those bits are my favorite bits of that movie because I just love when Chris Evans gets to do that kind of thing. And I think in The Losers, because his role is a very comedic role, I really enjoy him in that movie. And so I can forgive an awful lot of the rest of the movie as a result.
That's fair. I think we may have spoken about this on the podcast, is that character of Captain America could have been very jingoistic or very dry, but actually putting someone very likable in that role, Chris Evans, who can lend those bits of humour to it and just that bit of personality. I think that is where the character's strength lies in the film and why he's been so popular, because he could have just been, he's called Captain America, for God's sake. That's,
USA.
That's a different character.
Or Captain USA.
US agent.
Ah,
yeah.
Winky wink.
No, I think, and I don't know if I said this on the episode we did about Captain America, but I think reading the comics even is much more, when you read the comics, it's much more about a kind of square-jawed American kind of person who is not necessarily someone I feel like I would get on with in real life, whereas Chris Evans, I watch the movies and I'm like, nah, I'd go for a drink with that guy. I mean, he wouldn't go for a drink with me because he's famous, but
Yeah, you're famous.
Maybe he's a fan of the podcast, yeah. I hear he follows the Hugo nominations pretty tightly.
Chris, if you're listening, write in.
Yes, the email address is becometheteapot@hotmail.com. Can't wait for your email, Chris.
Or hashtag Ask the Teapot.
Right, so speaking of things that John was wrong about, and this will lead us nicely on to today's film, so this is a good segue.
I know what's coming.
John, for our listeners who haven't heard, John doesn't like The Raid.
Terrible movie.
It's infuriating how one man can be so wrong and still be upright.
I have a quote. I have a quote from John himself. He said, "The Raid is tedious, AF.
I stand by it. I'm so sorry.
I can only assume the AF stands for also fun, because the Raid is... I don't know what the tedious is about in that sentence, but the Raid is we talked about this on the show before, actually, is this idea of twin films. Actually, I looked this up, and that's the name for it, twin films. There's a whole Wikipedia page on it. Films that come out around the same time that have more or less the same plot or theme.
Yeah.
The Raid and Dredd, both films about law enforcement going into a high-rise building to capture a drug lord and having to fight their way up the building to the top, and including going through a drugs lab at one point and taking everyone out. One came out in 2011, one came out in 2012. They were both made at roughly the same time. John, you don't like The Raid. What were your thoughts on Dredd?
Segway.
Well, I haven't seen Dredd for ages, so it's difficult to... No, I watched Dredd yesterday.
Thank God, that's good.
I liked it. Yeah, I wrote lots of notes. So, firstly, can we just take a moment to appreciate how much emotional range Karl Urban can convey while frowning the entire way through for 90 minutes?
Yeah.
Like, I just don't understand how anyone can... I feel like he should have won an Oscar, right? Because he acts so well without really using any of his face at all through the entire movie. I feel like if you had had someone else in that role, I'm not sure the film would work anywhere near as well, but Urban really does a really great job.
I agree with you.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. I think just from the chin down, and that is all you see of Dredd in the comic books as well.
From the what? From the chin down?
From the nose down, I suppose. The bottom of the nose
chin
down.
down's his neck.
I suppose, yeah. The mouth down. There we go.
Yeah, all right.
But yeah, you saw this. I've lost my track now. Yes, he asked the same question 3 times, which is, "Are you ready, rookie?" And each time is a slightly different delivery, and you get the feeling that he has a slightly different response to her answer each time, even though it's the same line of dialogue performed in 3 ways. And it is just one example in this film of, like you say, a tightrope walk that you're going to be doing here, is that it could be something that you just have no connection to this character at all. But I think they really nail it with Karl Urban.
I do feel that in the film, there's a bunch of one-liners that he does say, but it doesn't feel cheesy because he's not saying them to be funny. It is the truth. Like the comic, he's very black and white. You know, see, there's the bit where, I don't know, his boss or whoever says, "Oh, you've got to chuck her in the deep end." And he's like, "It's all the deep end." But it's true. He's not there going, "Hey, winky, winky." Although you couldn't see it if he was winking anyway, so it doesn't really work.
Maybe he was winking.
He probably was.
After every one-liner, you got to imagine Dredd is leaning in and giving a big old wink.
Just, yeah. In every scene, he is making full eye contact with the camera. You just can't see it, but he's just staring you down. No, but it's a good point, because I think if there was even like a hint in his delivery of irony, it would in many places ruin the movie, because you would get that kind of like, oh, this is ridiculous. But because he really sells that every statement he says utterly sincerely and with no hint of irony at all, it really works the whole way through. So I think you are right that it's the delivery of the one-liners that avoids the movie becoming incredibly cheesy very quickly.
Yeah.
There's one that's a little bit cheesy. It's towards the end when he's like, wait for what? Wait for her to shoot you. Yeah. I do like it, but that one's a tad cheesy.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. It's the only one that's a little bit borderline. But obviously, Judge Dredd in the comic book as well has a huge amount of these one-liners. He does say these things that are very cheesy all the time. And I really like that they introduced that in here. But like you said, they really stayed true to the character in the fact that he is absolutely resolute in what he is saying. He is so hardline. I love the fact that he's like arresting vagrants. Have you watched the Sly Stallone Judge Dredd recently at all?
I have not at all.
Nope.
Okay, wow. Right, well, I'd say that's another episode. Let's do that another time. It's a very different experience. Takes off his helmet within 5 minutes of being on the film.
Also, because I saw it on my TV box thing and it said it would cost me like £9 to buy it, and I was like, I'm not spending £9 to watch that.
Yeah, it's not worth that. No, don't worry about it. I mean, he spends a lot of the time in the cursed earth without any of his judge gear, so it's just Sly Stallone running around in the desert. It's not good. And this is the thing, that was more overtly comedic. They even had like a comedy sidekick character. It was very 90s action movie. And I think that's perhaps one of the reasons this underperformed is because most people's memories of Judge Dredd, who was going to see this film in 2012, still remembered the late 90s version that was absolutely terrible. Yeah.
Well, they thought it was a sequel of sorts.
Yeah, maybe.
I wanted to. So Iain said a while ago that Judge Dredd is very black and white. And one of the things I really love about this movie is that you see as the movie progresses, he is very black and white and he's very sure of his opinions, but he's not black and white in the way you think at the beginning, because at the end, when the Chief Justice asks him about Anderson's performance, he is black and white there and he's made the right decision and he's made that decision for the good of the city, but it isn't necessarily the decision you think he would have made when you're watching the beginning of the movie. And I like the progression of the movie because it doesn't feel out of character at all, but it does show that he is kind of not just... So there's very little fat in this movie. Like, if something happens, it's happening because you need to know the thing that it's telling you, or because it's going to come up later.
Or because it's really cool.
But at the beginning, where he's chasing the narcotics, the three guys who are taking narcotics in the van, he only starts firing when they hit the guy.
Yeah.
Like, the point at which he escalates from giving chase to hot pursuit, like with firearms, is the point at which they become murderers. It sets up the fact that he is overreacting, because obviously the judges are in real life a horrific overreaction to crime.
Yes.
But in the context of the movie, he is reacting proportionately to what's happening. And that is an important thing. And it shows you it very cleverly and very subtly. And if I hadn't been paying attention, like the first few times I watched this movie, I didn't notice, but taking notes I did, like, oh, this is setting up that he isn't responding to everything by going in all guns blazing. He is kind of being more subtle than that. And I thought that was very good.
That's what I called going full Dredd, because that is what happens.
Yeah. I feel like that's almost the opposite of John's point. But
well, no, like he goes
after the
escalation. Yes. Yeah, he always acts within his own, within the frames of the law, and he follows it to the letter, clearly, as this idea that if someone's not killed anyone, well, of course, I'm not going to use lethal force. I'm not just going to shoot everyone. But as soon as you killed someone, the punishment is death at that point. Now, whether or not that should be in one man's hand it's a question for perhaps a different podcast.
Not ours.
For now, let's talk about cool explosions. But no, I think that's a really clever way of doing it. I really like that slow burn escalation as well when they go into peach trees, and that sort of ramping dread, the ramping tension that you get before it all kicks off. It reminds me actually a lot of another film set in a block. Not The Raid,
no,
but Die Hard.
Haven't seen it.
Because I was going to say Attack the Block.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because I was watching this, and because I think this is quite a British film. This is a very British take on the East Coast of America, I think, in many ways. And obviously that's
much
because
like
of the
comic.
Source. Yeah, because of the source material.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it really reminded me of Attack the Block, because you get that slow escalation and the sense of kind of simultaneously the sense of scale, but the sense of claustrophobia. But I think you're right that Die Hard does both of those things as well. I just hadn't thought of that link.
Attack the Block always reminds me of, and I think Joe Cornish may have credited this as well, it's John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Has a very similar sort of setup where it's basically the police arrest a man. Oh no, they take in a man who's witnessed a crime, and then the gang turns up to get him back. And that has the same thing, is that you have a setup and then it's all in one location. You end up in this one place defending it, in that case, rather than attacking it. But yeah, that is very similar as well. So all of that sort of genre have their roots in the same place, I feel. Perhaps Assault on Precinct 13 is the earliest example of those things. Should watch it. It's a good film. But then you might not like it. You didn't like The Raid.
Well, yeah, but this one looks like it might actually be good. So...
It's John Carpenter. It is good.
Yeah.
Ouch. Right. So we talked about Karl Urban a bit. What about Judge Anderson?
Rookie.
What do we think of Olivia Thirlby, I want to say?
Yep.
Hero from Why the Last Man.
Yes, she was in that.
So this is the adventures of Bones and Hero.
Nice.
Bones from Star Trek, Hero from Why the Last Man.
See. Do you know how...
That's my sense of humour.
Do you know how actors work?
No, that they are all the same character.
No, when they're in a different film, not playing the same person.
Everything's linked.
It's like it's like all connected, man.
Oh my god. Anyway, so that person. Yeah, I mean, she's all right. I have no strong opinions about her. That's the thing. it could have been anyone in that role. That's what I think.
I'm going to disagree.
Yeah, go on then.
I mean, perhaps someone else could have played that role, but I think she does a really good job in making it believable over the course of one event, how someone can go from a rookie who's hesitant to use force or lethal force on anyone, all the way up to what she becomes at the end. I think she does a good job in that transition to make it feel natural. No point does it feel like there's like a sudden switch, a turnaround. It does feel like a progression.
Yeah, okay.
I disagree slightly with you there, which is, I understand what Iain means about, she didn't make a huge impression on me, but I understand what you mean about it feeling natural. And I don't think it feels unnatural, but there's definitely the point in the movie where she executes her first perp. And that is the point at which, after that point, she can't go back at that point. She's kind of, you see her take her first life as a judge. I think that was very well done because you see the hesitation and then you see the result.
Yeah.
I really like, in the start of the movie, you know, he does the thing where, I'm going to, it's like trigger warning for discussing kind of sexual ickiness.
Yeah.
But there's the point at which the perp kind of imagines, how does she put it, a violent sexual liaison in a pointless attempt to distract her. And she's clearly not undermined by it, but equally clearly she's not like thrilled. And then later when she's interrogating him and he tries to do it again and she is just so much more comfortable, and it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes later in the film.
Yeah.
And she kind of just utterly defeats him, and you just get a sense for kind of how much more comfortable she is with the situation, like kind of now that she's been a judge for a little bit. And then the point at which she rescues Dredd and you get that kind of scene where he says wait and then she dispatches Lex. It's really interesting because at the start of the movie he's going first and she's following him, but then in the end of the movie when they're moving back through the raid, they're moving in sync. Like it really does a nice job with the cinematography of showing that she's his equal now rather than someone who's following him into the situation. So I think you're right, and I think there are moments where you can see that progression happening, but I don't think any of them felt clunky, which I really liked.
Because I think even after she shoots that chap and then they enter into the apartment and she meets his wife, or his widow, I suppose, I still think there's that emotional level. She's not quite at that sort of Dredd complete emotional shut off. So I still think there's a progression to be made. I think that's one step on her transition to becoming the sort of badass judge she becomes at the end. But it certainly is a big turning point, that of the film, in terms of her character arc.
Yeah, I do think she's quite smart as well. I didn't think it when I watched it, but then going back to type up my notes, I thought about that she's probably planted the idea in that guy's head that he would shoot her, causing his hand to go boom.
Oh, that's a really good... I had not noticed that, but I think you're right, and that is amazing. Yes.
Yeah, I never even thought of that. Well, look at this.
I was curious as to whether you both felt there are points at which the movie kind of surfaces the kind of trope of like, and I don't know whether they deliberately played on the ethnicity of the casting, but the perp assaulting the young blonde lady, and that's like a trope in popular culture. And then you have the thing where she gets kidnapped and she's being held hostage, and that's like the damsel in distress trope. And in both of those situations, she does herself get herself out of those situations. And I was watching it and I couldn't decide whether I thought the film was subverting those tropes or whether the film was reinforcing them, or a little bit of both. Because the first few times I watched this movie, I didn't really notice the gender aspect as much, but this time I was like, there are points at which I'm like, you could have had the women in the movie doing a little bit more, and I don't know what you two felt about that.
I think women are well represented in this. I think you could have easily had that Olivia Thirlby role be a male sidekick character and could have had the same arc, and we wouldn't be having that same discussion. We wouldn't have had, as you say though, the sexual ickiness to that role, which has probably added in as an element of realism. Now the writer is Alex Garland, who is a very good writer. He wrote Annihilation, which is an excellent sci-fi film, which has a lot of strong female protagonists in it. He also wrote Ex Machina, which examines gender roles very interestingly, with the female characters in that being androids, whereas the male characters are humans who own said androids, and the dynamic there. So very good writer, and I think one who has proven to have a good track record when it comes to gender roles. I also find it interesting that the character of Mama, the main villain of the piece, essentially could have again been male or female, and I think is a more interesting character perhaps for her progression of from prostitute, I think it said in the film, to top of the criminal empire. Yeah, so I do not have a problem with the gender roles on display here. I think that apart from Dredd himself, there are more strong female characters here than there are strong male characters perhaps.
Yeah, I do like that. I mean, we touched on that earlier on, that she saves herself. Yes, she does get kidnapped, but she's not a damsel. She's not like, oh, quick, judge. Sorry. No, quick. Judge Dredd, save me. She gets herself out.
Yeah, it'd be a bit confusing if she just said judge. I wouldn't narrow it down.
Judge, who? Which one? But then also, like, the boss, chief judge, or judge chief, or whatever, his boss is also a female, which, again, you could have easily put that as a male role.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, so Annihilation is another really good example of a film that a lot of people didn't love, but I thought was amazing. I really, really like that movie.
I love that film. Yeah.
I still haven't seen it. It's on my list.
And it's also, if you're playing a horror board game, such as Arkham Horror, which Iain and I are both fans of, the Annihilation soundtrack is on point for while you're playing that game. 10 out of 10 soundtrack to play. In terms of Ex Machina, I really like the way Ex Machina explores gender, but I know there are some people who have expressed criticism of that movie, and I'm not sure to what extent I agree with that criticism, but I know that it's not. There is some controversy over, because the only two characters in the movie that have agency are men from a certain point of view, and so you can get into a really interesting question as to whether the movie is subverting or reinforcing the tropes it's playing with.
Well, I disagree that the only two characters that deliberately have agency because they are human as opposed to android have agency, but the development of one of the characters is intrinsic to the plot, which is the idea that she is developing agency over the course of the film. But I feel like we're getting off topic there.
Yeah.
Also, his next film called Men looks very good.
Yeah. Although ironic title.
Well, no, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is an examination of gender roles again. So it is something he clearly has an interest in.
Yeah,
but yes,
he is.
That looks good too. But back to Dredd.
On the subject of Mama, I don't know if you noticed, there is a gang leader in the scene by the med center when they're like killing all those people. One of the gang leaders has a scar, which looks a lot like the scar that Mama had, and I wondered whether that was like a subtle detail to imply that some of the gang might have kind of facially disfigured themselves in a similar manner to her, which I thought was, I mean, horrific, obviously, but neat.
They also all had those sort of Mama tattoos somewhere on their body as well, and stuff like that. There was a nice little production design, and you could see as well various points, 3 gangs that she killed to take control of peach trees. You would occasionally see their markings, little elements like that I thought were quite nicely handled. Just a bit of world building, non-verbal world building. I assume we've got more to talk about the film. You clearly got millions of notes, John.
I've only got kind of like probably 1.5 more points.
I'll tell you what, fire away with your 1.5 more points, and then we'll move on to the comic book.
Cinematography, brilliant,
fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And I read the Wikipedia for the film to work out if there was anything clever I should say and make it sound like I came up with.
Oh, that's a good idea. We should do that.
I think it's Garland said that one of the inspirations was like watching nature documentaries where you see like horrific things happening in slow motion, and it's beautiful because it's like slow motion and it's nature, but it's also like, oh, this tiger just ate this gazelle. And like, having read that, I hadn't noticed that consciously, but like, yeah, the way they use the slow-mo and the way they make a lot of the violence very abstract in a way that almost divorces it. So it's incredibly gory, but most of the really gory parts are done in such a slow-motion stylized way that it, in the abstract, looks quite visually appealing, which is a weird trick.
It's quite cartoony.
Yeah.
They crank up the contrast, so the colours are so much brighter in those slow-motion moments, and that red blood that bursts out from people is so bright, vibrant red that, like you say, it is cartoony. But yeah, it's that contrast level that's just yanked all the way up, so all the colours are so vibrant compared to the rest of the thing, which is quite grey in a way, deliberately so, but yeah.
And because the drug taking scenes are so colourful, it kind of gives you a visual indication as to why people are probably doing the drug, because like you can see how drab the actual world is and how colourful and interesting the on slow-mo world is, and you're like, oh no, okay, this does make sense. It kind of reinforces the escapism of it.
It also allows you a good narrative way of just having lots of slow-mo fights, which directors love.
Yeah, but this is
just ask Zack Snyder.
This is for a reason. It's not just Zack Snyder being Zack Snyder. Yeah, see, something that I didn't say earlier on is the world that they've got in the film. It's futuristic, but it's not unbelievable. Like, I kind of feel that it could get to that point. It's not like Back to the Future 2 or whatever it is. That it's just a bit too far-fetched. Which,
to a certain degree, we see in the comic books. So there's a divorce between the comic and the film in the representation of the future. Was there half a point more?
Now it's sort of cinematography going into the colour.
Okay. In that case, this seems like the perfect time to move on to the comic book. So, we have been reading Judge Dredd, The Complete Case Files, Volume 3 by various...
Lots of people.
Because it is a list of about 20 different people. No, well, it's John Wagner, Pat Mills, Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, Mick McMahon, Brendan McCarthy, Ian Gibson, Gary Leach, Ron Smith, John Cooper, and Barry Mitchell. Hey, guys. Am I right in saying this is both of your first experience with Dredd in the comic books?
Yes.
I read a comic called Judge Dredd on the Emerald Isle, where he went to Ireland and met the Irish judges, and that was weird, but it was a long time ago, and I don't remember it very well. I think it was written by, like, Garth Ennis or someone weird, like...
That one?
Yes, that one. The one that is
Wow.
showing the camera right now.
I have not read it.
You'll find this about Ian. He has a huge collection of comic books that he's never read. He just buys them, puts them on a shelf, and looks at them. Just the spines. He doesn't like the rest of them.
I like it.
But yes, there's some very weird comics. I was around at our friend Kirsten's house the other day, and she had on her shelf Judge Dredd meets Batman. So I just sat there and read through that, and again, that was quite weird, but, you know, enjoyable enough, but it's all dimension hopping. And also in the first volume, Complete Case Files Volume 1, Judge Dredd becomes Chief Judge of the Moon, and goes to the moon and runs that for several issues.
Why not?
Yeah.
I did read a little bit of Case Files 1, and then I realised I wasn't going to have time to read Case Files 1, 2, and 3 because they're each like 240 pages long. So I kind of stopped halfway through and went on to 3 for the podcast. But earlier you said that Judge Dredd never takes his helmet off in the comic, and in Case Files 1 he does.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a big box over it saying censored, and there's something wrong with his face. But I don't know whether that's ever picked up again in any comic strip.
I think there's like 2 or 3 instances where they've had his face, and basically it's lots of people reacting to him going, oh my god, and then I swear they've actually shown his face and it just was normal, so I don't really know what's going on there. But yeah, for most of his 40 plus year history he has not shown his face. But what did you guys actually think of Judge Dredd, The Complete Case Files Volume 3?
I quite liked it.
Okay.
So, firstly, I think it's brilliant that his first name is Joe. Joe Dredd. What? Like, okay, fair enough. Fine, I guess. And he's got a niece, but he killed her father for reasons which are not very thoroughly explained.
Well, they were in another one of the case files, I think Volume 2, I want to say.
Probably,
Rico Dredd.
Rico Dredd. Yep. And also love. So in the film, the blocks are called things like peach trees. And in the book, they're called Charlton Heston and Enid Blyton. And that is like a different direction to go with that.
One of them was called Des O'Connor block.
Yeah, I love the idea that in 22nd century New York or like the Eastern Seaboard, there is a city block named after Des O'Connor. Like, that is British exceptionalism at its finest. But no, generally speaking, other than some parts which are clearly ludicrous, I enjoyed it. A couple of key things that I found interesting in the difference between the comic and the movie were, the comic, there's a lot of robots. Because the movie has mass unemployment, but the comic makes it clear that the reason there's mass unemployment is because there are robots. And that people have trouble adjusting to the fact that they have loads of leisure time, and that's why there's so much crime. And that was interesting. I don't feel like that came across in the movie, but equally, I think it would have been better if the movie had hung a lantern on it, because I quite like it just being high unemployment, things are rubbish. That is clear, and the kind of the deeper reasons for that are not necessarily necessary. Also, very much thought it was interesting that, well, I mean, I guess we might talk about Judge Anderson later, but she comes in right at the end of this run. Yeah. And she is quite different. And he's got Walter the Wobot, and you get to read about Walter the Wobot's scrap book, which I'm not sure is okay.
Yeah.
Just, I read it and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, there is some comedy to the comic.
Oh, huge amount, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't quite land, sometimes a bit in your face. I mean, yeah, the Walter the Wobot was one of my favourite bits. And then there was the Joe Lips something. I can't remember his last name now.
Oh. Yes.
But yeah, he was...
The guy who kept doing impressions.
Yeah. And even one of the guards is like, are you a gangster or are you a comedian? Yeah, it's a bit... I do find it funny in some bits, but other bits you kind of like, this is just a bit too on the nose, really.
I mean, the book definitely started off as a comedy. If you go back and read even Volume 1, this is why I decided to start on... Actually, I'll tell you what. There's 3 reasons I decided to start with Case Files Volume 3, which you should probably know, because obviously there are 2 volumes before this. First of all, it includes the introduction of Judge Judge Anderson, as we said.
Yep.
She plays a prominent role in the film, so I thought it'd be good to cover that because the film isn't actually based on any one comic book. Second of all, it gets us past the early Dredd stories, which, as I say, the character wasn't really fleshed out. It was largely comedic. It was very newspaper sketchy, just little vignette things. There's occasional stories like the Robot Uprising, which introduced Walter the Wobot, and things like that. It's also shorter than the two preceding ones, which meant it was easier to read in a week, which is all we had. And also, fourth reason, I didn't own this one and hadn't read it yet, so I thought I wanted to buy it. And I thought the best way to do that is to get you guys to buy it as well. So enjoy it. So that's the reason we're doing it. But yes, it becomes more, you're seeing the 90s, 80s, 90s, everything becomes a bit more grimdark in comic books, and that's certainly the case for Judge Dredd as well. This is really humour-led, very satirical, bordering on absurdist in some of those stories. There's a very sort of British sensibility to the whole thing, references that Americans are never going to get. Perhaps not Python-esque, I think it's probably a bit late for that, but more anarchic, maybe The Young Ones, that sort of level of humour, or something that seems very British. You know, traces of Douglas Adams, maybe, I don't know. It's sort of just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, and then over time, the character of Dredd developed from that, and the world of Dredd develops from that. I really like these comic books. They are stupid. They're kind of silly, let's face it. Yeah. And I think that's what you don't get from Dredd the film, is the fact that these are kind of stupid. And that's fine. If you pick them up, you can read 6 pages, and that's the story done. Or you can get one that's slightly longer, and might be more of a story to it. But at this point, they didn't know what was going to be big and what wasn't. It was just people wrote things, drew things, right, done. There's a story, and then they built a world out of that.
It did take me a while to get used to this type of comic style. On the podcast, we're used to reading a more linear type of story.
Yeah, that sort of serialized storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah, like A to B, done. And yeah, I do like that you've got the single issues, could be 4 pages, could be 6, could be 10. But then also you've got the ones that are split across 2 issues, 3 issues, 4 issues, whatever it is. You do get a wider world, or it explores the wilder world a lot more. And I actually think that maybe they could adapt this into a TV show more than, well, it would be more explorative into a TV show than it would be a film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is one story arc which is someone invents a sweet, which is so nice that the inventor has to be fired into space because otherwise everyone will just eat that sweet all the time. And I'm like, cool. And there's one, I think there's one about smoking, or there's something. There's one which starts with like a PSA of like, don't do this, kids, but like very thinly veiled. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
It's the bounce house one, isn't it? It's
yeah,
the one where
balling
they spraying
things.
themselves in the bouncy stuff, and it's like, don't do this.
Yes.
And then it comes up as a plot point later on that I was not
Yeah,
expecting.
that was so good. Like you get like another 100 pages down and someone like used it later and you're like, oh, that is a level of continuity that I did not appreciate they would have. But the funniest panel by a country mile is the part where Judge Dredd decides he's going to arrest a boat.
Yes.
That made me laugh out loud quite loudly because I was like, that is brilliant. And I'm not sure whether or not this comic captures all the nuances of Soviet-American relations during the Cold War, but definitely arresting a boat, we all agree that would have helped.
Yeah, if one man could have arrested a whole boat full of Russians,
Yeah.
world peace would be achieved.
It is funny, but he's still like a badass.
Yeah.
I feel that any of the other judges wouldn't have done that. Only Dredd would have done that.
Yeah. A really interesting thing with Dredd is that, and you see this all the time in his early stories, he is an absolute fascist. He is drawn deliberately to be, this is written in sort of Thatcher era Britain, and he is absolutely drawn to be a police state fascist in these early issues. But he's the protagonist of your comic book. He appeared in 2000 AD as an anthology comic book, and it just had various stories, and he appeared in the second one ever, the second issue, and is just their most popular character by far. But it's such a weird idea to say we've got a police state, we've got judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one, and he's going to be our hero of this story. A man who is so hard-nosed and uncompromising in his pursuit of the law that he will just kill people. And we see it in the film a little bit, arresting people for vagrancy and things like that. To the point where he sent Walter the Wobot to prison for helping him.
Yep.
Yeah. We did say earlier on about the one-liners in the film, and they don't feel too daft. In the comic, I think it's over the top. One of my favourites is when he kicks a guy in the face and he's like, "You've got a case of foot and mouth." That is just a comedic one-liner.
I will say that there is a brilliant bit. The bit where the city computer decides to bring Christmas early to the Des O'Connor block. And it concludes basically by saying, I guess that's a lesson to us all, Dredd. We can't give people happiness. The best we can do is law and order. And it's like,
Yeah.
fine. And I don't know whether that's satirizing Thatcher or whether that's satirizing communism or both. I don't know. But it was ridiculous in quite a fun way.
Yeah, I get the feeling there's no real target. It's literally just whatever the writer decided to do that day, and probably whatever was in the newspaper that day. They just went, I'm going to write a satire on that. I love that it can go between a parallel universe judge who realised that life was the real crime, comes into our universe to kill everyone because life is a crime, to, like you say, permanent Christmas at the Des O'Connor block within the space of a few issues. I love that it can say, right, let's just shake up the genre we're playing with. And it still fits. It doesn't feel particularly incongruous. It doesn't feel like these things are from separate universes or worlds. It is, right, yeah, sure, that's Judge Dredd.
That's the thing. There are issues that you think, what the hell has just happened? Like there's the one where the above neighbour turns the below person into a dinosaur because why not? And his name's Rex. His name's Rex, which is just it's a cherry on top of the cake. You know, it's
Yeah, subtlety was not a high priority when writing a lot of these stories.
Why was that not in the movie? That's what I want to know.
I compared him to two characters from other comics, either the Lizard from Spider-Man and also the Hulk as well. So, like, it's been commented in past where Bruce has tried to kill himself, but the Hulk's then stopped him.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they've taken inspiration from that stuff or that stuff taking inspiration from this stuff. I don't know.
I think they came before. I think this is also sort of various creature features. You got the Fly and things where people transfer into another thing, werewolf films. I genuinely thought you were talking about Dredd a minute ago when you said I think the character was inspired by other things, including the Lizard. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Rex. T-Rex.
Yeah. I think they just literally would pull from anywhere, and they never really knew, I don't think, what was going to be popular and what wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think this is why you end up with this sort of developing world where this is very much the early days, but it's already referencing things that have come before. I think later in this story, you see the return of that bouncing gel thing as a story point. You see the crack in the wall that was caused by the Black Plague storyline, just as an incidental plot point. And in fact, on the front of the Complete Case Files Volume 3 here, it says this is years 2101 to 2102. And this is the thing that Judge Dredd does that is unique to sort of mainstream comic books. Marvel and DC have these regular resets or this weird contracted timescale where nothing quite lines up. Judge Dredd occurs in real time. So you've got Judge Karl, the robot uprising that I said about earlier, his brother Rico, all referenced here, and those are in the early years of his career. By modern comics, he is canonically in his mid-70s. He has aged from then to here, and the year in universe has moved with the current year. And this is what I really like, this idea that you actually have a whole world that is occurring as it should do in order. I think that's a really unique take that really is in Dredd's favour, is the idea that there aren't resets. They aren't just going to ignore and pretend that funny dinosaur thing didn't happen, the weird T-Rex or Walter the Wobot didn't happen. They just happened 40 years ago. And then Dredd went and met Batman.
So he's in his 70s and he's still this. He's still Dredd. He's still kicking ass and taking names. And
yeah, he's just a lot more grizzled than he used to be.
Right, I feel that her name came up earlier on, but we never actually went on to it. Talk about Judge Anderson. Like John said, she's very different in the comics. I was quite happy to see her in the comics because I didn't know that she would turn up. I didn't even know if she was from the comics. And I was glad that she was a telepath as well because I didn't know if that was a film thing or not. But yeah, thoughts on that, guys? John, we'll go for you first.
Yeah, no, I liked it. I thought it was neat to see her. She's obviously, so in the movie, she's almost more like a kind of specialist consultant than just another judge who happens to be psychic. And I like her in the movie better than I like her in the comic, I think. Which is partly because in the comic, I don't think she gets enough to do.
No.
She talks to a man who is dead or who has been possessed. I can't exactly remember. And then she gets possessed by Judge Death. And then she gets encased in...
That ball thing.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's Boink
That's
again.
the bit.
Boink.
It's
yeah,
Boink.
yeah.
That's the plot
Like
point.
it's the funny bouncing stuff, and then she gets put in a box with a note saying she had to be encased in Boink because we can't kill her, and we have to keep the thing that possessed her in this thing of Boink. And it turns out Boink is good at containing possessed people as well as letting you bounce everywhere. With a little sign saying Judge Anderson, the most horrible thing is sacrifice, or I can't remember what the snazzy slogan was. But it was
Snazzy
something-
slogan.
something pithy. Oh, what was it? Aha! Supreme sacrifice. Judge Anderson, a monster dwells within her, on page 213.
Yeah.
And that was just, very different to the movie in many ways.
I will point out Judge Anderson does come back later, as
thought
does
she
Judge
would.
Death. And Judge Anderson became such a popular character. I think she even had her own spin-off comic book and things like that. So she did make a return. This isn't the entirety of her history, but this is my point about earlier on where I said about just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. They threw out this character. People went, oh, a psychic judge. That's interesting. She made a sacrificial play. That's cool. Let's bring her back and actually turn her into a main character. But certainly you wouldn't get from this first appearance that she was going to ever appear again.
Yeah, she's very just there, almost.
Yeah, she doesn't have much of a personality beyond the psychic consultant judge. And also, there's not really obviously there are muties, this idea of mutants in the comic book, and then she is a psychic. But there doesn't seem to be much. There's nothing really played with the idea that there's anything wrong with her. She turns up and she's part of the psyops team, and they're just like, oh, it's one of the psychics from down at the lab. Come on in. And whereas I like the idea that this film has made it that she is a bit more unique. She is of a family that was infected by radiation, and she's the only one who got powers out of it that were actually useful. I think the film does a good job of introducing her fully formed in that capacity. And I think this is what, with the comic book, what you have to get through a lot of it is, here's an idea, this may become more important later. It might not. It might be nothing.
You said earlier on that there was a Dredd versus Batman or team up, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a Dredd and the X-Men team up that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. That's the end of that sentence.
Fair enough. John, have you got anything to say?
That's a conversation starter for...
I have Googled it, and I don't think there has been, which is sad, because it would be good.
I think he probably crossed over more with DC. I don't know why. They feel more linked. I don't know why. Shall we ask other characters? Has he ever crossed over with Scooby-Doo?
I mean, I would watch that.
On that subject, there's a very good crossover between Batman and Elmer Fudd.
Brilliant.
It's a really good comic book, and you wouldn't have thought it would work, but it repositions Elmer Fudd as like a gritty hunter detective PI. Really fun stuff.
So, to answer your question about DC, I think the publisher of 2000 AD and DC have working relationship because DC published some Judge Dredd comics in the 90s, I think. And obviously, like Garth Ennis and Warren Ellis and Dave Gibbons and people like that worked on 2000 AD and then went over to Vertigo. So I think there was like a strong link between DC creators and 2000 AD creators.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is all uninformed speculation, but that's my impression.
Does the artist Brian
Bolland.
He did The Killing Joke.
Yes.
He did. And in fact, an absolute superstar lineup of artists on this comic book.
Yeah.
Brian Bolland, like you said, did The Killing Joke, which we've covered on the show. Dave Gibbons, he obviously drew Watchmen, which is one of the greatest comics of all time. And there's also Ian Gibson, as well as having a great name. He also co-created The Ballad of Halo Jones with Alan Moore. So, yeah, there's a really great lineup of artists on here. The way that Dredd is drawn varies depending on the artist.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's a big muscular guy. Sometimes he sort of just looks like a normal fellow in a leather jacket. But it seems that 2000 AD was basically where American comics started poaching from after a while. You saw it all the time. The British invasion of comic books in the 90s, I want to say it was 80s, 90s, was just loads of people who had written for Judge Dredd and for 2000 AD.
Another thing in the movie that I'm not sure I'd have picked up on if I hadn't read the comic, and I think this is in the first case files, is that allegedly there's no pollution in Mega City 1. And so in the movie, you don't see any cars that have exhausts. I think they're all electric vehicles.
Oh, really? I did not know.
I assume that was done in CGI.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily think that's how they shot it, but like the bikes don't have exhausts on the back of them. So I assume that was a cue from the comics.
That's cool.
That sounds like some sort of Easter egg to me.
He's doing the dance, listeners. I didn't know there was a dance, but there's a dance.
There is a dance. Every episode, there is this pause where he leaves it for me to put the music in. because he still hasn't worked out that I can just put the music in anyway and it will create a gap.
I thought that this was live.
No, you don't have to leave a gap.
Oh,
you can just
all
go
right,
onto your
sorry.
eggs. Every episode for 44 episodes.
All right, fine.
You have left a gap for the music.
44
And sometimes you
episodes.
sing the music.
I do. Iain second.
Ian's egg hunt. Ian's egg hunt. Ian's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you. Well, anyway, talking about eggs, drock or droke, I don't know how you actually pronounce it, is a swear word or a curse word in the comics. You actually see that in the film. It's not spoken because it's an 15, 18 film, whatever it is, so they can swear. It's actually on the back of someone's coat inside that van at the start.
Nice.
There you go.
Drock.
Yeah, drock.
And the film, they just say fuck a lot.
And you were talking there, John, about the Law Master bike, I think it's called. That was actually a real bike that Karl Urban rode himself.
Oh, nice.
They created that bike, but they couldn't put anything else on it, otherwise it would have been too big. And they increased the size of the wheels as well, so it actually would work. You could say it was done for realsies.
Ah, shit.
My favourite catchphrase.
I love that it's a catchphrase that you regularly forget you have. And
yeah, I know.
It goes episodes, months at a time without you mentioning it. Even if you do mention something that's for realsies.
For realsies. Anyway, peach trees, that came up in the film and in the podcast so far. That is named after a restaurant that the writers, or Alex Garland and John Wagner, met to talk about the film.
Cool.
Oh, okay.
And in the classroom and the mall, there is a flag of the USA. Obviously, it's the new America, which has only 5 stars on there instead of the 50. That is the 5 states that are now in this new America.
Yeah.
And last one, Kenny Who and Chopper are characters from the comic, and their names can be seen spray painted on the walls inside peach trees. And they even kept the little smiley face inside the O of Chopper. I think he's the spray painter in the comic, or that's a tag that you see.
Yeah, I think so.
There you go.
That's neat.
Nice.
Nom 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 nom.
Are you full, John?
I really like the flag. I noticed that in the classroom,
Yeah.
and I really liked that seemed like great attention to detail. I assume there are 5 mega cities, one for each state, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think as far
Why
as...
not? I don't know, because the Eastern... Yeah, sure, why not? Let's say yes, except... that's another story. I wasn't going to say about how one of them just got nuked off the face of the earth, but...
Oh no.
Ah, spoilers.
Spoiler for the comic books. Enjoy that one. But no, good eggs. I liked as well the fact there just was a classroom and stuff like that they never really mentioned. They just sort of go in there and you realise that, oh yeah, of course, people just live and die in these blocks and they don't leave them to go to school, to go to medical or whatever. They just stay here. I really like that, again, that non-verbal storytelling. But that's not an Easter egg. That's just an observation, which in many ways is the same as what Iain does. But
No, because what Iain does is excellent.
Hey. That pun wasn't dreadful.
Yes.
Hey.
Iain looks so sad right now.
Should we move on to the conclusion?
I like it when you're here.
Oh, I didn't tell you. I did the pizza quiz for the turtles, and I got the same one as you. So, yeah, we can gang up on this idiot all day long.
I'm not an idiot. I'm Michelangelo. Hey, John, do you have a favourite Ninja Turtle?
I didn't watch the Ninja Turtles when I was a kid.
What?
I've never seen any Ninja Turtles.
What were you a fan of as a child?
Nothing.
I'm guessing Star Wars.
My mum and dad wouldn't let me watch, any cartoons. I didn't watch Power Rangers. I didn't watch Ninja Turtles. There are all these cultural touchstones that everyone my age has that I just, I don't know what they are.
You were just reading Tolstoy and painting.
Yes. Crack out War and Peace at the age of 8. Now you say it, I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't watching movies because I haven't seen any movies.
Well, clearly, you like the losers.
Just staring into space waiting for death to come.
At the age of 8.
Yeah.
Are you sure you weren't reading Tolstoy? It
I'm a
seems
very
like...
nihilistic child.
Fair enough.
Anyway, conclusion?
Conclusion. So, hey, Iain, let's start with you, then we'll go on to our guest. Iain, your conclusion. What did you think of the film? What did you think of the comic?
Great film, great comic. Would highly recommend both. Boom. Done. John?
I love the movie and I'd highly recommend it. The comic I quite like, and I would kind of tell people they could read it, but I would be like, it is quite long and if you bounce off it, I think that's fine. But I'm going to go back and read Case Files 1 and 2, so I enjoyed it.
It's quite fun to just put down and read a couple of issues, put it down. It's fun in that way, in that aspect.
I think that's the best way to read this, and that is how it originally would have been read. I think I like the comic a lot. I think it's very much of its time. It's silly in a lot of ways, but it's a really good to just pick it up and put it down at your leisure. Read a story arc or a couple of story arcs and then pop it down. Like you say, when you're just reading them back to back to back, it can feel a little bit long. It almost reads more like a newspaper comic strip than a graphic novel, for instance, but I really like it. I think depending on your familiarity or your interest in Judge Dredd, your mileage may vary, but I really like it. As for the film, I think it's no secret. Love the film. It's one of my go-to comfort films as far as films I can watch over and over again and never get bored of. Right up there with The Raid. But what was Kate's quick opinion? KQO. We've got to come up with a better initialism of that.
That rolls off the tongue just so perfectly.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
She still thinks it's great, and if people want to hear more about her views, they can go back to the Old Guard episode and hear our Any Other Business. Shameless plug.
You can also hear our opinions on the Old Guard, which John agrees with wholeheartedly.
My wife watched the first 20 minutes of Dredd and then wandered off.
Has she come back?
She's not as into kind of retributive justice kind of things. She finds them a little bit depressing. So she's not anywhere near as big a fan as I am. She also doesn't like The Losers. I mean, clearly she has no taste. So...
Well, she married you.
Oh!
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. First time I met you.
Yeah.
I mean, entirely fair enough.
Thanks for coming on the show, John.
It's always important to go for the joke. Like, if there's a joke, go for the joke.
I went straight for it and thought,
Yeah.
Immediately.
Right. John, thank you very much for coming on the show. If our listeners enjoyed your dulcet tones and want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I do a podcast called Octothorpe, which you can find on all good podcast apps and some mediocre ones with my co-hosts Alison and Liz, and we talk about science fiction conventions and science fiction in general. I also do another podcast called Watch This, which is a podcast where I play Arkham Horror the card game on my own, but I haven't done an episode for ages. I
was going to say, I've not heard that one in a while.
Yeah, I need to play more Arkham Horror. If only I knew other people who played Arkham Horror.
We can start another campaign whenever you're on.
We could get Iain in as well.
We could do. Iain's never played it.
We could teach him.
He'll drag us down. He won't be at the high level performance that we are.
Is that the game with Batman in it?
I get it. And on that note, that's all for this week. Thank you once again for listening. If you've liked this episode, don't forget to rate and subscribe for all of our future episodes. Episodes such as our next one, and we're not ready to leave Karl Urban behind just yet, so ahead of Season 3's debut on Amazon, we're getting the boys together and revisiting the first season, as well as the first 14 issues of the comic book, by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson. Let's hope it's not diabolical.
Oh. It's back-to-back Urban.
Yeah, so is this May the Karl be with... There's got to be a pun in here, guys, somewhere.
Oh, okay, well, let's try this.
Normally it's my job, but if you want to put in a little comedy bit at the end, absolutely fine.
Is that your job?
You always say to me, say something funny.
Still
I'm
waiting.
like, oh, God, a quick panic.
The clue is I always say it, so you think you would prepare for it, but every time you're caught off guard.
Well, on that note, I'm leaving.
All right, fair enough. Bye. Looks like I need a new co-host. John, do you know anyone?
No, almost no one. I've got very few friends.
No, I'm your friend, John.
Hey! Should I
go.
stop recording?
Oh, yeah, I thought you had.
You might have to edit some of the end out.